A dam is an engineering feat constructed to control massive amounts of water, but it can also wreak havoc on the animals that call those waters home.
Dams are still a huge problem. You have massive dam operations, right? So these are species that are probably not going to make it.
They can be flooded out. The family of muskrats can be wiped out.
On the Black River in northern Michigan, Kim Scribner and his team are on a hunt for a monster lurking below.
They think they saw a fish down there, and so they're kind of trying to circle around and get a pinpoint on it.
It takes 4 people and a lot of heavy lifting to get this beast up on shore.
All right, let's get that big lady up.
It's a sturgeon. This fish is around 30 years old. They can live to be 150 years old and grow up to 5 meters long.
So these fish are pretty interesting. They've got really interesting mouths. Can you open it up there for them? So they actually feed off the bottom, and it's like a Hoover vacuum cleaner where they're just sucking invertebrates and things off the bottom, and then they've got these barbels that they're using for tactile organs.
If the fish look prehistoric, it's because they are. Sturgeon have barely changed at all since the earliest fossil records.
They're very primitive looking. They only have a few bones. They're mostly cartilage, right? They just have a couple of actual bones in the skull itself. It looks like something out of Jurassic Park.
But if something isn't done soon, these primitive fish could go the way of the dinosaur.
The population is probably presently about 1% of historic levels, and this is across the entire species range. They're very susceptible, particularly in small rivers like this. They're very curious, they're very docile. There aren't very many fish that you can just walk up to and net.
But the biggest issue is that many of the fish aren't even living long enough to grow this big. Sturgeon produce thousands of eggs, but somehow they're still not able to keep the population stable.
We estimate that over 99% of the eggs die. How is it they're not self-sustaining? How is it that they can't, be producing enough eggs and enough offspring that survive to adulthood?
Kim thinks it's partly because of local dams, cutting off stream access to sturgeon, who need to head into rivers to lay their eggs.
Historically, the Black River was connected to Lake Huron, and this series of 3 lakes, Blackbird and Mullet, were nursery lakes that supported a very large lake sturgeon population that spawned in several locations. After the dam in 1903 went in the town of Sheboygan, other dams upstream of here precluded access of the fish to historical spawning areas. This is where all the spawning activity occurs for this entire system.
Sturgeon need fast-moving water to spawn. It helps the fertilized eggs spread out over large distances to stay safe from predators. The Black River is now the only place in this area for lake sturgeon to spawn, which makes them easy picking for predators in the area. It's a problem for sturgeon populations all around the world.
These are fish that are living in rivers like the Mekong River or the Yangtze River, where you have billions of people. you have massive dam operations, right? So these are species that are probably not going to make it.
Out on the Bay of Quinte in Lake Ontario, Brad McNevin is trying to pay a visit to some unsuspecting muskrats.
What we're looking for is any sign that there's a muskrat house somewhere in these cattails, because we have what looks like a pretty recent little feeding area. Oh, I just saw one.
The muskrat is a huge indicator into the health of a wetland.
For muskrats, they are an interesting species to look at because of the way that this mammal spends its life cycle. It's always in a wetland. It can manipulate the ecosystem through the creation of channels, through the cattails, through its foraging. It eats cattails, and also for its house location where they like to build their den. Their houses are an important piece to proximity of where they are in relation to water, and how important it is to always have open water to maintain their life cycle.
The Bay of Quinte has had its share of problems. Brad works with Quinte Conservation to help restore the area after decades of pollution.
Historically, when this area was polluted, we had a lot of various issues. Tainted water in terms of taste and odor. We had high phosphorus levels in the water, which triggered large algae blooms, just garbage in the bay, oil drums, just anything you could think of, paint cans, things like that, that were floating around, that were on shore, that were, you know, in various locations, tires, things like that, that all contributed to poor water quality. One of the reasons why the Restoration Council was formed was that fish and wildlife populations were declining.
Now the populations are finally starting to come back, but Brad wants to make sure they stay for good this time.
Basically, Lake Ontario levels are controlled by a dam structure, and that's located down by Cornwall. And what we have is they produce power there that unnaturally regulate Lake Ontario, so water levels rise till about middle of June, 1st of June, and then they slowly recede as they generate power, whereas in nature we would have spikes and lows based on how much rainfall and snow events we get.
Unnatural water levels mean that muskrat dens get flooded out. Brad uses them as an indicator species to see if the dam is messing with nature too much.
Because the water levels are controlled, they were looking at using muskrats as an indicator to figure out what elevation and what types of fluctuations the lake would be able to handle and still maintain a healthy mammal population, and that would all tie into the other species that are around.
But Brad isn't optimistic. The bay is filled with cattails. Before the dams came in, they wouldn't have been here.
We don't have a diverse plant community in these areas. We don't have fish and wildlife habitat. About 80 years ago, this area would have been open water, channels, would have been green, have white water lily, yellow water lily, we'd have bulrushes and lots of diversity of plants. But now, as you can see, we have essentially a monoculture of cattails, and that's what we're trying to work towards is bringing back that diverse plant community, which will allow for more fish and wildlife to use the area.
But he's hoping that the muskrats can tell him the full story.
If we're losing populations of muskrats, then we need to look a little bit at the reasons behind that.
While Brad is searching the Bay of Quinte, over in the Black River, Kim is reeling in a massive beast.
Okay guys, you might have to hit the land here for this.
Here in the Black River in northern Michigan, it's spawning season. which means hundreds of sturgeon are coming into these waters from Lake Huron. Kim Scribner is using this as an opportunity to get to know every fish that comes through.
All right, so it's a previously marked male. We're just going to wand the animal just to get an ID number. We have them marked in two places, dorsally on the back and on the front, and so this one is 179330948. Okay, flip it over. Yep, and this one is 43136D48.
Because it's such a small population, he's seen most of these fish before.
Yep.
But that's the point.
What you were seeing today is something that we've done every year since 2003. With long-lived species, you need long-term data because every year is different. Every year you come here, when they spawn, where they're spawning, the flow rates, the temperatures, really quite different.
Pit tag readers are at the entrance and exit of the river, so that Kim will know when each fish comes here to spawn.
We're trying to identify the animals in the river visually, so we know where individuals are and the group size and what they're doing and where they are at all times they're in the river. So we use these Floyd tags. They're like little pieces of spaghetti, and they're different colored. So we mark the males on the right and ladies left. The first one in the position gives us an idea of whether it's an early or late spawning animal. And then the second and third tags is the individual specific tag color. So this one is white, gray, orange, orange. And so while the fish is in the water with the divers or us, as we're wading through the rivers, we don't have to handle the fish again. We can just look at the fish and say, that is white, gray, orange, orange. And we can say, oh, he's here today. He was someplace else with other groups of fish some other day. So we have an idea of movement patterns. And we're just measuring at different places to find the fattest part of the girth. That was 129 and 141 centimeters. That's fork length, total length.
Girth is 47.
Great.
This is a pretty small male, so 130. He's, I don't know, I'm guessing probably 20 years old or so. He's been up here before.
How the fish spawn is part of the reason their populations are in trouble.
These animals, they're broadcast spawners, right? So the females will release, thousands of eggs, and the males are jockeying for position. They're just stacked up on themselves. The males are trying to induce the females to spawn, and at the same time, they're trying to shove their way into a little bit closer position. So when the female does release the eggs, the male releases the sperm. It's a very inefficient fertilization system. Almost all the populations that are spawning in the Great Lakes are much smaller than normal. So you have so few individuals spawning that there just isn't the gametes, the male gametes, so a lot of the females' eggs go unfertilized. And that's a huge problem. So the female fish tries to deal with that by waiting until more males show up. But the more she waits, the poorer condition her eggs are in. So it's sort of a bet hedging game that she's playing. So a lot of the females' eggs aren't getting fertilized because of the inefficient fertilization system and the fact that we have such small spawning population sizes. And then the eggs are deposited, the eggs are dying in large numbers, they're being eaten in large numbers.
Now a massive female gets her turned.
So this is probably a female, and it's probably a female because fish that are this large, and this is obviously larger than that other one, are typically female. Okay guys, you might have to hit the land here for this. It is 49.6.
That's 49.6 kilograms, over 100 pounds. She's also more than 2 meters long, making her one of the biggest fish they've seen this year. Kim quickly tags her and sends her on her way.
All right, she's good to go.
As the female sturgeon swims away, the team hits the water again. But they don't have to go far before they pull up another big fish, one that's already been through the spawning grounds this year.
This pink color indicates that this guy was in here during the early spawning run, so a few weeks ago. And so this is one of these males that leaves the spawning area and then decides to come back and try to have his way with the ladies a second time. You can see that this is really, really small compared to the other fish that we have. So this is gosh, it's probably just a little over a meter long. The fact that this is still this rough indicates that this fish is just recently sexually mature. So this is probably one of the first times this little guy's been up here.
This fish was first encountered on May 12th and it is currently the 28th. We had new tags for our pit and our RFID, so that means we didn't have him prior to this. So this might be his first spawning year, and he had a total length of 123 centimeters, so he's very small.
This sturgeon is about 15 years old, just reaching sexual maturity. He's one of the lucky ones that stayed alive long enough to finally start reproducing. Since he seems so eager to share his sperm, Kim collects it to take it back to his office. Here they breed sturgeon to help with research and to give them a helping hand in those incredibly dangerous early years of life.
We know what the problem is. Sturgeon are not self-reproducing, right? They're not recruiting in numbers to sustain populations to levels within the management horizons that people are looking at. And so people are looking at hatcheries, right, as a means of getting at that. Hatcheries have an important role, but it's only one tool.
That's why his work is so important. To know how and when they're reproducing, and then understanding why their offspring aren't surviving, is a huge step towards protecting them. Brad McNevin wants to know if the muskrats need protecting at all. For that, he needs to find them. Brad McNevin is searching for muskrats on the Bay of Quinte in Lake Ontario. This area used to be home to some harsh pollution. Now that the water is being cleaned up, there's a new concern: fluctuating water levels due to a big dam upstream. He wants to see how these constantly changing water levels are affecting the muskrats' dens and how they build them. To find out, he's got to dig.
Our goal is going to be to see if we can see any muskrats in that den, to see if it's a house that's being utilized or not. All right, so I suspect that this one is possibly abandoned, but we're gonna just dig in here a little bit and see what we find. The water's pretty high up in it. Yeah, when I dig down in here, I can feel where the house part of the den would be, where the open air would have been, but I can feel the water. So this house would be abandoned now because it's been flooded. Yeah, you can feel the house portion of the den.
Muskrats are not using this den anymore. If they were, it would be a really bad idea for Brad to be sticking his hands in here.
Yeah, so we wouldn't want to do this if we thought that the muskrat den was active, because we'd be introducing a lot of scent, and that could cause predation. This would be an average size house. Sometimes it could be a little bit bigger. In most cases, they're packed with cattails and mud on top of them, and this would be a reasonable sized one.
Muskrats are tricky to spot because they've evolved to be able to hide underwater from predators. They can close their ears to keep water out and can hold their breath for up to 17 minutes.
Muskrats are a small rodent. They're not actually rats or anything like that, but they're brown in characteristics. They're fur-bearing mammals. They have a small tail on them, and they get their name muskrat not from being close to a rat, but it's actually the musky smell of their fur.
Looking for a den among the cattails is very tricky. They're well camouflaged and buried deep within the thick reeds.
They have a network of channels under here. Oh, I just saw one. There's lots of activity right here. It may have in fact been a beaver that I saw. I saw it briefly go underneath the cattails in one of the pools. That's a den right there. Yeah, see, that looks like a really good den.
Muskrats collect building supplies to reinforce their dens almost daily, and that's when it's easiest for Brad to spot them.
that's definitely a muskrat. Swimming right along the edge. That's really great to see.
It's good news for the water in the area. It means the levels are consistent and the quality is still improving.
I think over the last 25 years, considering what the stories were told and the pictures that were shown in this area, I think we have a really good news story. Water quality is a very important piece to fish, to wildlife. We draw a lot of our drinking water from the Bay of Quinte. A lot of municipalities, their primary source of water comes from the Bay of Quinte. What happens in the Bay of Quinte impacts what happens down in Lake Ontario and in St. Lawrence River. So we're all connected through this whole water system. And water quality is an important piece to that. I think we've done a great job.
Over on the Black River, Kim's team is letting go of the last sturgeon of the day. He's not exactly quick to say goodbye.
So the handling is a little stressful for the fish. You can see these pectoral fins. There's these things on the side, and these things they're quite maneuverable, and that way he can hold himself in place until he feels up to moving on about his business. And so I think he's good to go. And he's not really interested in going, but...
As the fish heads off to find some more females, Kim is hopeful about their future.
I think there'll be more of them. I think they'll be in more places. I think that the more abundant they become, the more their role within the system will be noticeable.
He has good reason to be optimistic. Since the animals have such a long lifespan, it takes time to see the benefits of all this hard work. But already, the population seem to be doing much better.
You have to have an understanding that with a species with an ecology like that, things aren't going to happen overnight. The populations that are now starting to recover because we now have cleaner water because of the Clean Water Act. We now don't have the excessive exploitation. Dams are still a huge problem. Climate change is a current and emerging problem, I think, for fish and a lot of species in the Great Lakes and elsewhere. But I think a lot of progress has been made. And they're just, they're just a charismatic species. I think they're really a poster child for fisheries and for fisheries science and for conservation simply because of those facts.